everybody. Welcome on behalf of the Public Library of Mount Vernon and Knox County and Break Bread Literacy Project. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Before we get started, I would love to hear from you. If you can, go ahead and drop your preferred name and pronouns into the chat. You can also tell us where you're joining us from so that we get a little map of the country and sometimes the world. I know we've had a few international participants recently, and that's been really cool to think about. Break Bread is all over the place, and our library is in rural central Ohio. So it's a lot of fun to see where folks are coming to us from. We'll be writing and learning today with Dr. Janett Barragán Miranda, our visiting writer, and we are super excited to welcome her. Hi, Janett.
Hello.
Janett is an assistant professor at the Latino Studies Department at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. Her research focuses on federal food assistance programs during the 1960s and the repercussions of these programs on the community of Mexican origin. Barragán Miranda is the faculty advisor for a student organization called Food Justice Alliance. As a first-generation scholar, she is committed to nurturing an environment that centers on the experiences of people at the margins of society in and outside of her classroom. Welcome, Janett. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today, and I'm just going to get started, right? We're all set? Okay, so I will share my screen here. I have a PowerPoint. So there we go. Okay. So yes, my name is Janett Barragán Miranda, and I am at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the Latino Studies department there. And so I'll talk a little bit about what I do and how I came to archives. But I also just want to thank everyone at Break Bread for the invitation to have me here today. I'm so excited to talk about archives and hopefully inspire some of you as creative writers to delve into the archive and find some documents and things that might inspire your writing. So I'll talk about myself for a second. So I am not a historian, but I come to the archives as somebody who's trained in Chicana and Chicano studies. And I have my PhD in Chicana and Chicano studies. And so what that means is that my approach to research, to questions, to investigation, my study really come from what is traditionally known as the margins, right? The outer ridges of a subject, right? And so my approach aims to center all of the folks, the people, their stories that lie on the outside, right, of that center of a subject. And so how I do that is to really highlight, right, stories that exist in the margins, highlight experiences of people and who appear to be ordinary, right, who might not appear to have these extraordinary contributions, but they do. They have extraordinary contributions in history, and that's at the center of my story, right, my history. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today a little bit, right? How do we get to the archives? And how do we kind of look at not just the center, but also the margin? So for example, in a newspaper, right, what would be traditionally the center? You might think of the headlines, you might think of the big articles. And for my research, I really look at classified ads, at the little things that exist kind of around even the physical newspaper, right? So my work in my research project is called Hungry for Equality, the Mexican Origin Community in the Struggle for Food Justice During Civil Rights. And so the study is about the history of food assistance programs, and its center is really the efforts of Mexican origin people. So if anyone has any questions about that, I would be really happy to talk about that as well. And because my story takes place in the past, I do a lot of work with archives. I go to a lot of places to find documents about the past. And like I mentioned, I'm not a trained historian. So my approach is a little different. And I think since many of us here are in that same position, I will have a lot to relate to how we might approach the archive, but also just to inspire you into thinking that there is not just one way of going into the archives, right? That you can do it from all kinds of different angles. So I'll talk about mine. Today's roadmap. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is an archive. How do we use an archive? Your archive, your own archive, my archive, everyone has one. So we'll talk a little bit about what encompasses our own personal archives. And then I have a writing activity, since this is a writer's workshop, a writing activity with a document from the past, 2 documents from the past. So one we'll read together, and then the other one is an image. So you'll look at the image, and we'll just spend time looking and reading the first one. Then I'll give you maybe 5-8 minutes to write something in response. So if you want to write a poem or write kind of a response to what you just read, then we'll look at the image and do the same thing, whether you want to add to the first piece or create something new. And maybe we can do sort of a stop and share at the end of that. And then we'll sort of debrief the end of the workshop. So I will keep an eye on the clock and as I talk here. And please ask questions as we move along. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And also I will ask questions of you. So please feel free. And I hope that you feel comfortable participating as well. Okay, so what is an archive? Really, really general definition of an archive here. A place in which public records or historical materials, such as documents, are preserved. So when we approach an archive, we're going in to uncover documents from the past. And the most exciting part of this research is that we're going to do some investigation, right? Some investigative work and uncover some knowledge of the past, maybe find something that might appear a little like less meaningful, but that to you might, have some into maybe writing a little more. So let me show you some examples of what this might mean. And this is very California focused, but every state has archives, right? So the California State Archives, Illinois has their own archive, every state has their state archives, right? So this up here is an example of the California State Archives in Sacramento. This, right, a public library, that's also an archival repository. Public libraries hold all kinds of information, primary sources, original documents, things like that, right? This is the JFK's presidential library. So presidential libraries have a ton of archival materials, right? From that president's administration, all of that. So in Southern California, we have the Nixon Library and the Reagan Presidential Library. So those are 2. The JFK one is in Boston. Also, online archives, the Online Archive of California, the National Archives, the National Archives in the Library of Congress, right? Those are 2 repositories that exist in online. Some documents are not online. Some documents you have to go in person to see. But those are some starting points. If you don't want to leave, right, your space and you want to do some archival work from there, you will likely find some stuff. Like you'll find something at the Online Archive of California or the National Archives. So what kind of documents might we find in archival repositories? Let's see. What are some ideas? Maybe we can put them in the chat. What are some ideas of some archival documents that we might find If you have artwork, yes, you might have original art, posters, flyers, things like that. Letters, yes, letters, postcards, right? We could mix up art and some letters. Photographs, yes, you might find some photographs, things like that. Birth records, yes, birth certificates. And so within that, right, within the letters, you might find some detail, something that happened, someone said something, right? In those photographs, you might find some themes, right? Major themes that you might be interested in doing. Are you interested in labor? You might find some photos of people laboring, right? Birth records, if you're looking for a certain person and you find their birth record, you might find some really important details that you didn't know. So let me go through some archival documents here. So genealogical, right? Family tree, birth records, death certificates, marriage certificates, things like that can oftentimes be found in different libraries. Laws, you might find documents that have to do with a law that you might be looking into. Newspapers, you could find microfilm, right? Which are those big machines that show us the reels of newspaper articles from the past. So you might say, I want to go look for this small newspaper that doesn't exist online digitally right now. And I'm going to go into this library and go through some of their records. You can also find some digital stuff like the New York Times, the LA Times, big newspapers, right? The Chicago Tribune, you'll have those available digitally. You might find speeches, presidential speeches, but also all kinds of other speeches, diaries, people's kind of personal journals and things like that, letters like you all mentioned, interviews. These can exist in transcripts. So you can find the transcripts of interviews, but also audio of interviews can be found at archives. So you might find this online as well. There's a lot of work in interviewing braceros from the Bracero program for Latinos or Latino Chicano studies. You might also find interviews that are, that are archived and you can kind of listen to them. Do we have a question, Jamie?
I know what a bracero is.
Oh,
You know what I
right.
mean? But I don't know if everybody does.
Right. Yeah, so workers from the 1940s into the 1960s who came to the US from Mexico, predominantly central and northern Mexico, and they would work for a few months, 6 months, something like that, like a portion of the year they spend in the US working, and then they would go back. And so they would do this kind of backwards migration, back and forth migration. And so a lot of people who were part of that program have been interviewed for a few different kinds of data collections. Census documents, right? So we fill out the census every 10 years, see how many people live in a certain household, what their, sometimes we get details like the longer list in the census. So you might find, you can find their racial, ethnic group, sometimes their ages, depending on how long the census they filled out was, right? But we oftentimes get a lot of demographics, right? So we might find out what existed kind of in the past and what, a place, a state, a county might look like. Surveys, all kinds of surveys, photographs, right? Like you all mentioned, photographs can range. You can find menus, right, of restaurants. The LA Public County Library has menus of all kinds of restaurants, and they have that in photograph form, reel form. Videos, so video and audio, I mentioned a couple of different ways that this can appear, right? So through interviews, might also find documentaries, things like that. Posters and flyers, so kind of a form of art, but this also helps you to see what people were doing, what concerts, if you're into music, sort of this could be really wide ranging in terms of events and things that were happening around the city or the place that you're interested in researching. And finally, I have maps, right? You can find maps from the past in these different archives. And so these documents, these are some examples of documents. They're not the entirety of everything you can find. There are many other types of documents that you might find that are likely not listed here, but this is just to give you a scope of how vast the amount of documents and different types of things that you can find in the archives could be, right? So this could be really daunting, right? Because we might think, what am I looking for? What part? So you have to have an idea when you go into an archive of what you're interested in looking for. You should have a kind of a population you're looking for, a person, some kind of theme or subject, right? So that you don't get too turned around with all of these different types of documents that you might have. So my next question is, how might creative writers use archives? So in what ways might poets use archives, or fiction writers do both? And you can include it in the chat. So if you're thinking of now that we know what an archive is, what it houses, right, a range of documents, how do you think that someone who's a creative writer might be using the archive? Yeah, so they can inform someone who's writing historical fiction. Absolutely, right? So somebody who's doing historical fiction is definitely hitting up these archives to find out how some information about the past, how to frame their work, right? You can help create a truthful background, a story for a character. Yeah, so much more believable background, right? Something that people can have a lot of detail, right? It might inform the writer of what kinds of details existed in this setting, in this place in the past, right? Absolutely. Excellent. Phrasing, slang, the way people talked. Sure. So maybe you hear that in interviews, or maybe you see that in the way that things are written. Yeah, absolutely. And that also would kind of open us up to think of, the way that people interacted, the things that they saw. So say you're going into the newspaper, you might look at a few newspapers from the 1940s. Let's say you're focusing on that, and you might see what were people in the 1940s reading in the popular newspaper. And you might find some kind of, something that might give you a little background on what was going on in that era, or what might have been popular. Anything else that you might be thinking about with the way that creative writers can use the archive? Maybe as we move along, we might have some more ideas about this. But certainly you might also find some major themes or gaps or things that you hadn't thought about, even if your work is not about the past, right? Even if your work is about the present, you might also be able to sort of reach out into the past through the archive and find some details that might help to add some context. Okay, so let's talk about some steps to take at the archive. Like, let's say that you get to the point where you're ready to go or do some research. First, you have to do research before you arrive at an archive, before you decide which repository you're going to use. You need to find out what they have, what kind of documents they have, who has the documents that you're looking for, or the type of subject that you're looking for. So that's important. things that you should bring or think about if you're going physically and you're not doing one of the online archives, you might want to bring a camera. And this is interesting because times have sort of shifted things in terms of technology, but a lot of times you have to find out if you can bring your phone with the camera or if you need to bring a camera, because a lot of archives, especially the national ones and the presidential libraries, will not let you bring literally anything in but pencil and paper and a camera. So you should find out what their rules are. So you should check out the archives rules. What can you bring? What should you not? They usually have lockers and places like that. But it's really important if you decide to go somewhere to find out what are their rules and how to follow those so that you don't, you're not turned away, or like they're not going to turn you away, but so that you're not, you don't have a bad experience, that you're prepared and you're ready to use the archives. And lastly, really be ready to spend a lot of time. So if you plan to go to an archive, be ready to spend a lot of time there. So plan your day around going and looking, because sometimes it can be a little more time consuming, and every archive is a little different. Make sure that if you do spend or think about spending a lot of time there, that you're thinking about your meals, right? Your meal breaks, your stretch breaks, that you give yourself some time to also just, take some time off from just looking at paper all day. Yeah, if there's technology at the archive that you don't know how to use, like for example, a microfilm, like those machines with the newspaper, archivists, the people who work at the archive, will teach you. And archivists, just a note, are people who work at the archive and who have an intimate knowledge about what's stored there, what is everywhere inside of the archive. So be sure to ask them questions too. If you don't know what exactly you're looking for, if you show up and you're looking for this box, but you're not clear, be sure to tell them what your project is, or share what you're writing about. And they might have, some information of some documents that are stashed away that you hadn't really thought about. So they're very important people. As you make your way through the archive, it's really important to get to know them, or at least just, have some interaction with them and share with them what you're working on, and they'll get so excited to share with you what they know and how they can help. The thing about archivists is they're always really excited to be a part of your project, whatever that looks like. So be sure to not skip over, meeting them. All right, so let's talk a little bit about index guides, which is the first point of contact with the archive. Index guides are lists of subjects and files that are held in archives. So I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And so these lists are really extensive. They can be really long, right? And one archive can have many collections and index guides. So they can have all kinds of subject guides, and subjects can go, if you're looking for, let's say, feminist idols, feminist people, right? And so you go and you might look up that word, but that word might not have existed a really long time ago. So you might look for something a little bit different, right? So you have to find a list of words that you're going to approach these collections, these guides with. Jamie, yes.
Sorry, I'm geeking out over all of this. It's so cool. I was wondering if you could explain like a little bit about, could you explain what an index guide is, just in case somebody has encountered one? No, it's all part of it. I just might, I'm following along, but I want to make sure I don't get lost.
Yeah, I should have, I have this, let me, yeah. Let me show an index guide here. So we're going to go to the Online Archive of California because they're online and it's just easy to find out, to see what they do. So here we have, this is the homepage. So we would go to collection guides, right? And that's where all of this is their index. The Online Archive of California is set up so that it has all of these. So this is 0 to 9, and then it starts A through Z. And so here we see the titles of some of the things that they hold. The I on the left here is shows documents that are available online. Everything else we would have to go into an archive to look at. If you want to see the descriptions, you would kind of just hit there and see, and this gives us a little bit of a description, a short description of what's inside of the archive. So let's say I'll just pick a letter like S. And so here we have some documents from Sacramento. There's all kinds of, I mean, if you just kind of scan through, it's really overwhelming, the amount of things that you can find. So one of the ways that you can do this is that you can enter kind of a keyword, or you can just search the guides up here. See, you can search the collection guides. So let's say I'm interested in farm workers. Okay, so I would find all of these different archives that might have some information, right? The California Farm Workers Oral History Project. And then here we have the collection title, the call number, right? The collection number. And this is what you would use at the actual archive. This is not available online, but I would have to go to the California State University, Northridge, so Cal State Northridge to find it. And I would give them this number and say, this is what I'm looking for. And they might bring me however many boxes are available. Or they might have another collection guide that has details of what's actually inside of this. So maybe I'll have some names of people, right, with a little bit of detail. And so here you have the description, background, how big the actual collection is. Sometimes you see how many boxes you have, and then some of the restrictions. So what can you, how do you get permission to publish something that's on here, right? So like images, or even just the documents themselves. So if you're trying to publish the whole document, that can, sometimes you need permission for that. Just kind of depends on how public the archive is. And then the collection is open for use, so you can definitely access this. So this is how you would kind of go through if you had a keyword, like I had the word farm worker. But if you don't, you could go through here, right? And then sort of find maybe what you're looking for. And let me show you what it might look like if you were looking for something that is available online. Let me see. Okay, so we have some photographs here. California Agricultural Teaching Aid Photograph Collection. So you'd go online items available, and this might look a little different for each archive because they're in different places, right? This is just the California online archive, so it'll have different collections from different places. This is from the UC Davis library, and so you see some photos here, okay? Agricultural photos, and it's just, and you have some details. So if we wanted to look at one of these photos, we would get this description here, right? And there's no date, but we find out where this is actually located if you're near this library, okay? And so you kind of, you know, this might be like a photo that you would say, oh, let me based on this description, how can I write to this photo, right? So that might be a way of using the archives as writers, right? And the national the national archives are really similar, right? And the system is really similar. So if you figure this out, if you figure navigating this, you will likely be able to kind of navigate other things. There is also this digital, right? This digital archive. I don't know why this page looks so funny right now. And they just have photographs here. And so you can kind of also explore, if you're looking for photographs, you can explore some of the things that are available online here. If you don't want to go to a physical archive. And sometimes there is also exhibits that are happening through the Online Archive of California or the National Archive. And through those exhibits, throughout the year, they change. They highlight some of the photographs, some of the different things that they have. The LA Public Library does that. And so some of those might be really helpful for you if there's a theme that you're interested in writing about. And there is an exhibit. They have already done a lot of the legwork, right? And you don't have to necessarily go through this process of finding finding all of the documents yourself. So I mean, I think it would be a little fun, and you find unique kind of documents. Let me go back here. So the last point that I had here is to be patient, right? To be patient with the archive, because you will find something, but it could become really overwhelming. So if you have an idea of what your theme is, what you're interested in looking for, then it becomes a little bit easier, but also sometimes you just have to dig around, and the archive will yield something that is useful to you. So it's kind of hard to tell when that'll happen, but I say be patient with it. Yeah, Jamie.
I was just going to say that, like, I loved how you're talking about the time, because when you have extra time and you're bored, sometimes you come up with great ideas, but you can't be bored in an archive. You're going to stumble across something where you're like, what is this? I did not know that,
Yeah.
And then you can do, like, now we get lost in our Google searches and our, but in the archive, you're holding like a book from 1630 or, or these incredible things. And so, make sure you give yourself that full experience by let yourself dawdle and really
spending time there. Coming through. Yeah, especially depending on what you're interested in, right? I just scrolled through that list, and there was just so many different themes. And also, like, you don't have to focus only on where you live, right? Or the state or the county. You can also just go and look at, what is the next state over or somewhere really far have in their own archive, right? And so you might find some different kinds of themes. So yeah, absolutely. I think really important to sort of spend some time. And now we have also just online, like, social media archives, right? Like, there's a lot of people who are collecting like photographs and things like that. And you find these like different social media archives, which are a really great way of, like, if you're scrolling through your phone, right, it's the same idea. You're just scrolling through old documents.
And I think too about like the little towns and stuff often have like a historical society or a place where you can go, so you don't have to be in a big city.
No.
And those people will practically do cartwheels when you
right. Yes.
Door. They have been waiting for you.
Yes. It'll be it's really exciting if you go in and you're looking for anything. You're just trying to find maybe a local newspaper or something. Okay, so archives are not limited to public spaces, right? So it doesn't have to be the public library. It doesn't have to be the presidential library, the online art library. So what do I mean that archives are not limited to public spaces? So archives can exist outside of the archival repository, like I mentioned, maybe a social media archive, right? And there are others, right? So what might be another kind of archival space that you can think of that I didn't necessarily mention here? And that's not really the library. If you can think of anything else and share it in the chat. Grandma's attic, right? Right. Yes. With the cemetery count. Yeah, because you have the birth and death of people and their names. I mean, I would count it. Like, online lit journals. Yeah, so sometimes there's journals that go back in time, right? And they have works from, decades ago, things like that. So you might delve into that and look at what people were writing about. What were some of the popular themes? Yeah, Jamie.
Sorry, I was trying to type and talk at the same time.
Yeah.
I was thinking about maybe a historic house or something, or like they have markers for battlefields, or and sometimes they'll have, I know in Ohio, you can do a QR code and it will take you to other resources, and lots of places are doing that. I guess
so
public,
historical sites, places like that.
Yeah,
Absolutely. But yeah, and also just expanding on Grandma's attic, right? Like people have a lot of stuff a lot of times that are their own archives, right? Like you have an archive as well, right? Which was part of my next point, right? You have an archive. We all have archives, right? In the things we save in all kinds of spaces. Let me just go into this. So if you can think of some examples of what are your own personal archives, right? What could be some examples of things that you've archived or that you've held on to that you can say, these are the types of documents I have already for myself. So if you want to share it in the chat, if you feel comfortable talking about some of your own archives. Let's see. I kind of mentioned social media, right? So that might be a place where you've archived different events, things. But what could be other examples? If you were to think of your own personal kind of archive.
I was just thinking about I never thought about it this way, but what about a yearbook?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Just things from your past, right?
Or your little corsage from a dance or something.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
I mean, that's part of a story.
Yeah,
right?
It's part of a story. It may be interesting to somebody. Somebody might say, you know what? I've been writing about flowers. I've been writing about high school and flowers, and I'm wondering if I can see your corsage. And then you go, what? This is a thing that people want to look at, right? Or want to write to. So absolutely. Okay, so letters from Magdalena specifically, right? So so letters that you received from people. Sometimes you might pass letters around or something like that, right? Concert tickets, right? All of that stuff is part of your archive. Those are all documents and things that that are important, that record something that happened in the past, right? That might have a story. And whether you write to that story or somebody else does, right? They can really serve a purpose. So the point is to they don't necessarily have to belong to you, right? They can also be shared, or you can talk about them with someone else who might find some inspiration from your own archive, right? The list can be really endless. It depends on what kinds of things you have decided to store and save, what kind of boxes you might have. Can a family story be an archive? Yeah, like I think one way to record the family story, right, is just to turn on a recorder, like whether it's on your phone, whether it's, in any kind of capacity. But sometimes we kind of need to do that, right? Just look at the next person, or a story that you've heard over and over in the backyard over a barbecue, right? But you know the story, but you want to record it. It's always kind of a good idea to just do that, right? To just take the time and do that. And then you can store that and you say, oh, I have this story of something that happened to someone in my family, right? That they always would tell this story over and over, or something like that. And so maybe right now is not the time, or you're not thinking about writing to it, but maybe in the future you would, right? So, I mean, that's one way that I can think of storing stories, but were you thinking of something different?
No, not really. I just was thinking about, like, there are a lot of things that my family recorded, but some that they didn't, that like I know for being told.
Mhm.
So I'm like, so I guess what I'm asking is, like, are those archival once I document, like once I'm going to center this on myself, but I mean, like, if once someone documents them, they become archival, but when they exist in the like storytelling or like oral history sphere, they're not archived yet. Like, I was trying to sort of make a weird distinction, because I was thinking about how much exists in the space that we're in right now. Like, well, we're actually being recorded, but if we weren't,
right.
talking, that's weird.
Yeah. Well, because we're not saving it, right? Like in like a physical format. I would sort of say it sort of blurs the line, right? I mean, there's Horacio Roque Ramirez wrote about the living archive, right? Yeah, okay. I feel like things are like,
that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, the living archive, right?
But I always think about that question, like, is it real if we don't write it down? Like, is it I don't know. I mean,
so the living archive is what you're saying, right? Which is like, I am an archive because of the information that I hold, right?
Each of us.
Each of us, right?
Yeah.
And so then to approach a person, like to do an interview or to talk about something, to approach them and say, what's the information you have, and really validating their stories and the stories that they hold in the same capacity that we would validate or take, as valuable the documents that are stored at a presidential library, right, is a really powerful thing to do, because a lot of folks might not have documents. Like, I don't have photos of my parents as children, right? They didn't take photos, like they didn't have money to have a camera to have photos or things like that. But if I ask them, like, or if I ask their siblings, what did my parents look like as children, right? That I would be kind of approaching them as a living archive, right? Like having all of that information, and then kind of imagining it from there, right? And that can be a really powerful thing if I'm equating, right, their voices to these material document or something like that, right? And to have that trust to say, okay, what you're telling me is truth, right, is a really powerful thing. So the living archive, we don't have to necessarily have it, physical in the space, but if you can use either way. And I just wanted to really reiterate that if you spend a lot of time in an archive, it will give you some things, it will yield some information. Sometimes we look for people like ourselves or for themes that are really resonating with us right now in the present. And a lot of those themes might exist in the past, right? So whether you're looking for students, workers, like, I mean, those are just really general ideas of what you might be looking for. But it's important to kind of start from a place of something that might be familiar. A lot of times, right, in the present, if you kind of feel like people might not relate, or you don't find your own identity in the books, in the places, in the poems that people are writing, then you might go back into the past, right? And find some people who can fill those gaps and make you feel a little more like less alone and more a part of thinking that the themes that you're thinking about existed in the past can be a really powerful thing as well. Okay, so let me go into this writing activity, which I think we might only have time I'm going to mesh both of them together. I think, Jamie, I'm just going to.
And Janett, if you want to go over, you can go over, because
Okay.
that way I want to make sure we are generous with our time. If you have it, like, I don't want to make you late.
No.
I'll follow you. We can always, if somebody misses the end, we're recording, so they can view it later.
Okay, great.
That way we don't run shy.
Okay, yeah. Okay, let's do one and the other then. So I have this handbook that comes from it comes from the Library of Congress, which is a big repository, archival repository, where in Washington, D.C. So this is one of the big ones. It would be like a national archive. And they have a book called Americanization through Homemaking, and it's from 1929. And this would have been circulated throughout Texas, the Southwest, but really Texas and California is where most people have written about it. And it was used as an educational handbook for Mexican American children. And so they would go and take these classes that were teaching them like American culture and things like that. And so this is a handbook that teachers who were teaching Americanization would have used. And so let me just go through here, because this is the first page. So this chapter is called Sewing, and I kind of wanted to show you what would be an example of something you might find in the archive through this. So maybe we can spend a few minutes just looking at this. And Jamie, can you tell me, do you think folks can read this text, or should I zoom?
I think that they can read it. Do you want, would you like to read it out loud, or would you like me to help with that? I don't mind either way.
Yeah, if you want to read it out.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay, wonderful.
I'm the intern tonight, folks, so I'm here to help you. All right, so this is chapter 1, and it is called Sewing. Mexican girls are very fond of sewing. Girls younger than those accepted often beg to enter the class. There should be no grades in this line of work, but promotions to be marked by ability. Often a 14-year-old girl just arrived from Mexico who must take first grade or adjustment academic work will surpass others of higher grades in sewing. Since only about 5% of Mexican girls who graduate from the 8th grade enter the high school, their ability as seamstresses must be developed in the elementary schools. For this reason, it is best to begin instruction in sewing as early as possible, the 3rd year at least. And if the girl is 12 and in the 1st grade, she should have sewing, since she has but a few more years of schooling. Girls who have reached high school have been found to hold their own and often surpass American girls in the work. The course of study should be varied somewhat, that given our native girls. The needs of the Mexican home and community must necessarily be vastly different from those of our own people. We should strive in every way to make our course of work fit the needs of these people when they come to us in the schoolroom. They will then have a greater respect for the school and for our civilization. Make the course of study fit the greatest needs of the people. I don't think I've read anything with my teeth clenched like that in so long. Wow. Would you like me to continue, or may I stop?
No, that's the end of the first page.
Wow.
And then we break up in that last paragraph. So I was thinking maybe folks would want to write to this. Yeah. So this might be something you find in an archive. You might read a page, and then how do you now write to this, right? So however folks decide to, maybe we can spend the next 5 minutes, right? So, I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to share anything that they wrote, or maybe even around a theme or something.
Yeah, and if someone wants to share it, you can either drop it in the chat or I can unmute you. So
Yeah.
just let us know.
Uh-huh. And if not, there's in these documents, in this kind of document, in this short 1-page, right? There might be some challenges, but also opportunities, kind of depending on how you approach it, right? Some details that might be left out, context that you might not have. For this example, we don't hear the voices of these girls, right? Their response. How are they constructing or considering sewing and becoming seamstresses, right? All of these can be challenges, but also opportunities for you to kind of think about that perspective, right? So if you're being thought about in this way, then maybe you can add fill in some of that context. I think for the purposes of writers, that might be a little more of an opportunity than a challenge. So I will go to the image maybe, and we can kind of leave off there if there's any questions or anything that folks have. The next one is that I had was an image. So the same topic, right? Same handbook, and you have this image of a sewing class of Mexican girls. And so the challenge or the next activity would be to write to this image, right? Is this different? Is this different than the first with the writing? And so kind of exploring both ways that archival material might exist or that you might come across, right? You might lean towards kind of writing to an image rather than to some writing. Jamie, should we maybe open up if anyone has questions to kind of close up?
And again, you can either put your questions in the chat or you can ask to be allowed to talk. We want you to.
Yeah.
Do you think, can this one be zoomed without it? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Getting
because I had
pixely.
zoomed
I'm
out.
wondering, because I'm just so curious about the faces, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Right there. Okay.
Yeah. And would you like another 5-minute timer?
Yeah, we can do that if folks are interested in kind of just looking at this image for 5 minutes and writing. Does anyone want to share anything that they wrote about this image or anything that, yeah, kind of folks want to share about that 5 minutes?
It looks like Camille has posted something.
Oh, okay, great.
Camille, is it okay if I read it? Or would you like to read it? Okay, yes, you can read it. All right, I will do my best. Mama always tells me how great of a sewer I am. It's a gift that every girl should have, she says as we organize the sew box. At the beginning, I used to complain about the needle picking my fingers, but my maestra says we have to be proud of learning the art of the ladies. As I put the last thread of line on the box, Mama tells me to get ready to go to school. I can see that her mind travels far away from here when she mentions school. I hear when she talks to Papa about how happy she is we get to study properly. Maybe she really thinks I'm a great sewer. I might teach her sometime.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really awesome that folks had some response. I hope that this was a useful exercise. We have a question also, right? So let's see. So we have this question about are sewing classes bad? Sort of what is the perspective here, right? I'm confused on if it means they were taught to be seamstresses instead of real school, or if they got real school and sewing classes. And so then when they say that most girls never went to high school, why is that? Right. Okay, great. So this brings up a lot of really important themes about archival documents and some of the lack of context and some of the work that you might have to do if you go into the archive, right? Which is to add your perspective and write from the angle that you're reading the document from, right? So these things, these questions, right? That's kind of for you to answer or to kind of consider if you'd like, or if you might say there's not enough information here for me to write, right? To write in one way or another. And that's okay. So you might want to look at the second, the third, the fourth page, and then try to kind of understand if this is of interest, or if you're still skeptical and unclear about where to write from, right? And that's okay. That makes sense. If that's the case, that but you're going to have to make those decisions of how you're going to analyze the image, how you're going to are they are they happy? Are they sad? Is this enough information for me to be able to write or not? And so that's part of the work that the researcher has to do when you go into the archive, right? Is to find enough information that then you can write to. And you don't have to write from the point of it being good or bad. It can also just be about sewing, like we just saw. That was a kind of a good example. Just sort of a theme that might come up for you.
Well, I want to thank Neil for sharing with us, because it's always really special when something comes out of the workshops. And like, I know for myself, I never share. I'm always ashamed and think it's no good. But like, I want to encourage everybody like to think about that, because there are times when, I've gone back and looked at it later and it's turned out all right, or like if you continue working on it. So today, like Janett has given us a great taste of how you can get started and a great starting point that I think has just been wonderful. So first of all, I want to thank you. And it's hard to clap and stuff on Zoom. So we'll all be snapping and saying thanks. And you're more than welcome to drop comments to us in the chat about today. But thank you so much for being here with us. It has been so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And please feel free to share my contact if anyone has any follow-up questions or anything that you're working through or looking for archival documents. I would be happy to help if I can in any way.
Cool. And I know like we haven't launched them yet, but in the fall and spring, Break Bread typically does some like open studio workshops. So if someone wrote something today and you want to bring it in and get feedback from an editor, those will be posted pretty soon. Like I know that they're in the works. So that's another opportunity to get feedback for the things that you composed today. And if you'd like to follow Janett on social media and read more of her work, you can do that. And I will type these in when I'm done talking, because I'm terrible at talking and typing. Also, please forgive me for that. And make sure that you sign up for our next Creative Classroom, which is going to be on Thursday, October 20th, with Ohio fiction writer Jyotsna Srinivasan. And she has written a fantastic short story collection about growing up as a first-generation Indian American in Central Ohio. And it's really cool to have voices coming out of the Midwest and then coming to us with Break Bread. And we are super excited to have her with us then. We also want to thank on behalf of the public library, I want to thank Janett. And also we want to thank Break Bread Literacy Project for partnering with us. All of the library's online programs are available on our YouTube channel. So you can go to www.knox.net, and we always edit these and make them look nice. And so in about a week, this one will be available, and I'll send an email to everyone with the link so that you have it. And we're just really excited to have people here who want to help kids learn to write stuff. And so it's been wonderful to have such inspiring and really thought-provoking experiences. Thank you so much, Janett, and everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and it was great to get the feedback of the students here.
For sure. So everybody, happy writing. We'll see you next time. Bye. Thank you.